Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with the longtime professor at Boise State University. She is an entrepreneur, photographer, and also an author, the great Nancy Napier. She teaches strategy and creativity, coaches executives, and leads Boise State University's one-week Executive MBA residency to Vietnam. She first went to Hanoi in 1994, joining a project that helped to establish the country's first international standard business school at the National Economics. Because life is not just research and teaching, she reached out to leaders and managers in other formats. After 35 years in the academic and research world, she is embarking on something completely new, fiction writing, which offers her joys and challenges of being a beginner again. She has a great story. Enjoy the interview.
Hi, Nancy.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Where are you located?
Well, I'm in Boise, Idaho, and I see you're in Kansas City.
Yep, Kansas City, Missouri. Absolutely.
Very good, very good. Best barbecue around, right?
Oh, yeah, barbecue, jazz. I think we have the most fountains in the world. We're like one click behind Paris. So,
Really?
Yeah, we're in good shape.
Oh, that's good. We have some good friends who live in, they live in the Missouri side. I can't remember the area, but been there a couple times, and it really is nice. So good for you.
Yeah, people get kind of addicted to here. It's one of those places where people leave and come back, and it's kind of a surprising little destination in the middle of the country, for sure.
Yep.
So, but Idaho's beautiful country up there, too. I've been up in that area.
Okay, yeah, it is, and it's been really discovered during COVID. So we are seeing an influx of people who realize they can live and have a good quality of life place and don't have to go into the office. So good and bad, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a natural segue for the beginning that I wanted to get into, which is COVID. And, as a creator and entrepreneur and author, how did this time as an artist treat you? How did you change? What did you realize? Now that we're kind of hopefully coming out of it.
Yeah. Well, the creativity that I have worked on in the last, decade has been focused really on how organizations try to be creative. There's a whole lot on how individuals are from several hundred years ago, but that was my focus. So to really learn how a variety of different, real diverse organizations approach creativity and leadership. And so I've done a lot of writing, nonfiction writing in that regard. So when COVID started, I thought, this is a time for me to do something really new and go back to being a beginner. So I decided I would try to learn how to write fiction after 30-some years of nonfiction. And I had never taken a creative writing course in college and over the years. And so it was really starting from the beginning. And I have, I'm frustrated. I was just working on it before we talked, but I am so challenged and so, so excited about being a beginner at something. I think if you're in a career for a long time, you get to the point where you can do certain things pretty well and you forget that not everybody understands what you might be talking about or how you're doing something. So I started learning how to write fiction, and I'm writing the world's worst novels, which is great because I have no expectations right now other than just getting better at it. And another piece of all this was to decide to learn how to play tennis, which I'm not a big athletic person, but again, it's put me back in a position of being a beginner. I still teach executives in a graduate program at the university here, and so that has really helped me think about how do I present, how do I get ideas out in the classroom for people who might be beginners in some of the concepts we're talking about. So it's been a good thing to think about creativity personally and going back to being a beginner and learning some new, really hard things for me.
Well, another thing, too, is that you're a photographer. So I guess to kind of boil all the parts down of who you are, if someone was to bump into you and say, hey, what do you do? What is it that you do? How would you explain that to somebody?
I think I would say I'm a learner, an aggressive learner in a lot of different things. I'm not an expert in many at all, if any. So I'm just a constant learner, and in that regard, in writing, I'm not much of a photographer. I'm still a beginner at that. I work at it, but now a sport and so forth. So I'm just an active, aggressive learner in all ways. I've had over the years opportunities through serendipity and also just realizing that I am kind of an academic entrepreneur, chances to do things and try new things that I probably wouldn't in a lot of other settings. So it's that being an entrepreneur unexpectedly, academic entrepreneur, and then just constantly being curious and wanting to learn.
When you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be an author and an archaeologist and an architect. They all started with A's, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to major in once I got to college. Then I thought astronomy, and that didn't work. But I was at a college, a liberal arts school, and they allowed people to basically develop their own programs and their own majors. So that was the first time when I put together 3 different disciplines. So I studied German history and history and political science and put together a major on that. And then I did that with my master's degree and PhD. So I hadn't thought about it explicitly until maybe, 15, 20 years ago, that I really want to draw from different disciplines and fields and learn. And maybe it's because I don't have an attention span beyond about 5 to 7 years. And so I pick research topics and work on those and then switch. And that forces me again to be a really new learner in the academic world. And now I'm doing it in this fiction and tennis world as well.
So what was the first piece that you wrote that you really felt like you had arrived and that you were a writer and that it was worthy of being published? Do you remember what that piece was?
Well, from an academic standpoint, it would be an article that I did in the late 80s, early 90s. I had an opportunity to look at an acquisition. A big bank was buying a smaller bank, and a friend of mine was the head of the human resources area in the smaller bank, the one being acquired. And I got to learning about mergers and acquisitions, realized there's no such thing as a merger. It's a euphemism, but I watched that process. It was very painful because I talked to lots of people about what they were going through, particularly on the acquisition side. And I ended up over the next couple of years doing some research in that area, and I published an article that was kind of a review of what was in that field, and it was probably the one that most people cite if I have to pick one. What I learned in that was that I'm better at kind of doing research and writing on things that are at the front of people's thinking, as opposed to once a topic is in the news, is in the academic world, I can't compete there. So from the academic standpoint, it would be probably that article. Then I got into looking at creativity in organizations and across different types. So from a football program to a sheriff's office to a software company to a Shakespearean theater. And it wasn't a profound idea, I don't think, to see what people can learn across fields. But nobody was really talking about it or doing it, and the leaders themselves got a lot out of it. And so one summer, I basically wrote a small, short, very easy to read book for leaders on that, on what these different diverse people had learned from each other and had provided to one another in terms of ideas about creativity and leadership. And so that one, it's a little book called Wise Beyond Your Field, I feel real proud of. I'm not like it's a bestseller, but it keeps coming up and seems to be helpful for a lot of people.
So from an artistic standpoint, we all have these moments with something that we either read or listen to that really inspires us. It's something we come back to and we love. What was that book for you? What was the book you read that said, wow, I love this? And it really kind of deepened your love for reading?
You know, and I was a big reader as a kid, and I remember A Wrinkle in Time, that book by Madeleine L'Engle, which I don't remember the details, but at the end of it, I realized that the entire story had taken place over a few moments. And so it was sort of a time thing. And that struck me, that the ability to build a world and build an experience for a person who was lying on her bed or sitting out in the backyard, that was striking. And I was probably 10 years old at that point. So books, lots of different types of books, but that one as a kid really did hit me hard. And yeah, so that would be the start, I suppose. I've been looking at my bookshelf. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So in all of your experiences as a professional, you know, we get feedback, we get people that are appreciative, but what's been the best fan letter or response that you've ever gotten back from somebody?
You know, I write a little column, short, 300 words, for our local newspaper here, about once a month or every other month, a couple of weeks. And every now and then, what I learned over time, too, is that I have not been as open or vulnerable a person earlier. And when I started to open up and talk about myself in these little articles, the response was really remarkable to me. So, for example, I have a fantastic dog. We've always had dogs, but this one has become a therapy dog. And so I've written about going to the hospital, going to hospice, going to memory care, and what I'm learning by watching people interact with the dog. And so to talk about something that's not super personal, but it's about me, not about in my academic world, it was always great distance. So I wouldn't say there was a single letter, but the response has been, yes, I felt that, I know that, I saw that, and I've just been surprised. I guess I shouldn't be, but that when I've opened up a little bit more, that's been a really positive response. I did a 9-year-long project in Vietnam in the 90s and early 2000s, and I continue to do work over there and take graduate students there for a week every year. And I wrote a book with a co-author, Vietnamese co-author, that called The Bridge Generation of Vietnam, about people who grew up during the American War and then went through a period of about 10 years of terrible poverty and famine. And then the economy opened up and it has just boomed. And so these people that I've known now for 25 years are leaders of the country in business and education and government. And so she and I wrote this book about profiles of some of these people. I included in the book some essays, again, personal, about what I was learning at the time I was going through this project and since then. They were, for me, again, incredibly personal, not for a lot of people, but to say this is what I was feeling. And the fact that my dad had been there in the 60s, my husband was a medic in Vietnam in the 70s, that response, again, people said, well, it's interesting to see the profiles of all these folks, but it's also interesting to have you be sort of the guide for us to talk about what you learned, what you saw, what you felt during your time that you've been working there. So again, those kinds of responses have been, I guess they're encouraging to tell me that it's okay to be more open.
So, you know, you're obviously highly motivated and accomplished in what you do. And I'm curious, who would you consider either a role model or a hero in your life?
Oh, I've had so many. I've been really, really lucky to have people all the way from professors. My dad was a role model early on. First job I had, there were 2 or 3 people who just really helped me learn how to write. Frankly, I was learning how to write business lingo and reports and so forth. So they were definitely role models and heroes. I went to Ohio State for a PhD, went to the University of Washington after that for a few years, and came to Boise State University in Idaho for a year, and ended up staying now 35 years. And the person who hired me here was a man who was the head of the department, and basically he said, you can see your tracks in a place like this. You can make a difference in a place like that. And I was lucky enough to work with him for 3 years before he died at age 50 of lung cancer, but he definitely was another hero, I'd say. And then I have a lot of peers, I suppose I'd call them peers, who have been heroes to me over the years in terms of encouragement and support in so many ways. This is a university that when I arrived, nobody knew about it. Nobody had really heard of it. And I feel like I've been fortunate to help build the reputation of the university. But it was a place where people said, oh, you want to try that idea? Go and do it. Oh, see if you can build something. So again, that's where I sort of realized I was more of an academic entrepreneur than just somebody stepping into a situation that's already built and running well. So to have a number of those people, and this man was the first one probably to say, oh, sure, why don't you try that? If it doesn't work, that's okay. We can try something else. So for people at the university to model what we see in organizations that are trying to be innovative, that was tremendous for me. So the sense of, if it doesn't work, that's okay, try something else. That's so obvious. And yet there's so many places and people that are either not willing to let someone take the risk or not willing to take the risk themselves. So I give a lot of credit to my university here and the leaders that we've had, and as well as several personal folks beyond the university.
So you've clearly been at the university level and the academics for decades, and you obviously enjoy it. But my question to you is, what do you like the best about it? What is it that you look forward to every day going into that environment?
The one thing every professor will tell you that he or she hates is grading. Grading papers is no fun, but has to be done. It's the feedback and so forth. So that part I don't like. What I love, and I have been working with a graduate program called an Executive Masters of Business Administration program. I helped design it about 10, 12 years ago and have been teaching it ever since. These are participants that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. They're already successful and they want to either lead their companies or think about starting their own. They come from everything from large firms like Micron or Hewlett-Packard to small entrepreneurial firms, healthcare, the arts, and so forth. So it's a wide variety of people. They're incredibly motivated. And every time I think about, okay, I'm going to go in the classroom and teach, I'm nervous. And I think, oh, gee, can I keep up with what's going on? Because they're, as I said, very motivated. So they have great questions and discussions and so forth. And I come out with more energy than I went in with. So to me, that's a real positive. So being able to be part of that in the classroom. I also do executive coaching with a number of them. Same thing. It is, both those experiences force me to be absolutely in the moment and be present. I tend to be a person who's looking at where am I going next or replaying what I could have done better. But I love that it forces me to be right there in the moment, and that they will push the instructors and they push each other so much that we all get better, I think, as a result of it. So that's really what I look forward to. The colleagues that I work with also are outstanding. And so to be able to bounce ideas off of them, solve problems with them has been tremendous. Really, really fortunate.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be?
Anybody alive? Oh, boy. I should have an answer to that question, but I don't right off the bat. I can't even tell you their names, but the women in the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, who, from the sounds of it, have done a good job with COVID and just in general. I spent some time in Denmark, was really lucky to do that. And sort of that mentality of we are a community and what can we do for the good of the community. I like that. Same thing with the Prime Minister in New Zealand. So those women, I think, have done a good job from what I read. I don't know anything independently about them other than what I can read, but I would love to find out more about them. I think there have been some interesting women in politics over the years, and right now we're lucky to have, sounds like, those women, and I'd love to meet them.
So in this very short time, you've mentioned some pretty magnanimous geographical locations on the planet that you've done some pretty good work in, like Vietnam. And I'm curious, what were some of the biggest eye-openers for you from a culture when you traveled? I think we get pigeonholed sometimes in this country with the way we see things, but when you leave, there's so much more history and tradition that exists in other places. What were some places that were big eye-openers and growth periods for you?
Well, I was lucky enough to spend a year in Germany when I was in college in Munich, and I went over with 1 year of German language study under my belt. And again, I figured there's nowhere for me to go but up. And I lived next door to 3 guys who didn't speak much English, so my German really improved quite a bit, and which I ended up marrying a man who was originally from Germany. We spoke German with our children when they were young. So that was a huge life changer at the time. Just the confidence and the openness of learning another language was huge. I mentioned Denmark, and I guess one of the big takeaways there, Denmark is often cited as one of the, quote, happiest countries in the world. And when I was there, I started asking people what was going on, and they said basically our expectations meet what we have. We don't always want the next thing. We're not always trying to keep up with the Joneses. What we have, we buy quality, whatever it is we can have, we keep it for a long time. So our expectations meet what is there. And I thought, okay, that's a good lesson. Absolutely. And then I've spent so much time in Vietnam, and a couple things, I guess, come through early on when we brought our Vietnamese colleagues to Boise in 1995, I guess, that summer. And it was the summer that the U.S. and Vietnam reestablished diplomatic relations after 20 years of being officially an embargo by the U.S. on Vietnam. And the people who came, we talked about that when they encountered Americans, probably the baby boomer generation mostly, but they would encounter these people, and when they say the word Vietnam, they mean war. And the Vietnamese said, that's one of our goals, is to help people understand Vietnam is a country, not a war. And so they have a phrase that they all used, which was about war. They've had, 50, 100 wars in the last 1,000 years. And so they say, we never forget what happened during a war. We try to forgive, we make friends with our enemies, and we look to the future. And that attitude, that had been drilled into them. They all admit that's a piece of propaganda they've learned. But that attitude of we won't forget, but we're looking to the future, and we want to be friends. And so I've always amazed when Americans, again, older Americans nowadays, travel to Vietnam. They come back and say, wow, the people were so nice. I really expected them to be upset and angry. And I say, well, 60, 70% of them were born after our war ended. So these are kids or grandkids. They don't remember it. And they are looking to build the country, which they are doing in a remarkable way. So that sense of looking forward, building it together is huge. The other thing that, again, during writing these profiles of people who grew up during wartime and now are leading the country, one of the things that I saw there was this notion of resilience. Whatever's going on, will find a way through. And so that has been, I think, really helpful for me personally, but I've loved watching that in the country. There is concern, and actually out of that book, we also made a documentary about the changes that are going on culturally in Vietnam. The name of the documentary is From We to Me. And so there is some concern that as the country prospers, that there's more emphasis in younger Vietnamese about thinking about themselves as opposed to family, community, and so forth. So in the past, a family member would do anything, whatever it took, to raise money for their children's education, for example, and send their children abroad if that was the best thing to do. Nowadays, as young people, and the young woman in our documentary says, I want to study art. My father wants me to study finance. I don't want to do that. And so there's concern in the country as things begin to change culturally. How will they manage it? So I haven't been there since COVID. I'm going next month, in about a month. And so I'm curious to see how COVID has affected them. Have they gone back to more of a tight community, family feel among the younger ones, or how all that's changing? But anyway, those are some things from 3 different settings I've been really lucky to spend some time in.
So you got some things on the horizon. You've already talked about a book and going to Vietnam, and I'm curious if we were to have a conversation in 5 years from now. I'm like, Nancy, what's going on? What are you happy to see that happen? What are you hopeful for now? Is, obviously COVID's easing, you get to travel, things are opening up, new adventures. What are you looking forward to?
I think this, particularly in the writing side of things, I really want to get better at fiction. As I said, I have 4 really bad novels, and I'm trying to figure out how to either improve 1 or 2 of them, or the next one I write to be better. One of them I'm working on is, it partly takes place in Vietnam. And so one of my goals has always been to help not just Americans, but anyone who's interested, learn about that country and the people in a way that's not about a war. And so to write and now use fiction as a way to help people learn a little bit more about the country and how important it is for us as a trading partner, but also we've got 2 to 3 million Vietnamese living in the U.S. So I want to continue working on that. You mentioned photography earlier. I am lucky that I've just returned from Zambia. So we had planned a safari trip to Zambia that's been postponed a few years and just got back. And the opportunities for photography in a setting like that are phenomenal, of course. And part of why I find photography so interesting is that it relates to writing to me. You have to have a clear focus of what you're doing. You have to be able to think about the story you're trying to tell in an image or in a written piece. And so I would like to be building that skill, those linking those 2 skills better, so then in 5 years I could do a better job if I'm writing something about Vietnam, that I could include photography that's good in it, not just the type of shot that shows I was there, but rather it also tells a story at the same time. So I guess those would be some of the big things that I would love to work on. And then I will continue teaching for the time being, and that is just thrilling. I can't wait to take this group of folks. I think we're going to be about 30 executives to Hanoi in October. Our university president is going to go along as well. And so to introduce all these people to the wonderful folks that I've known over the years and let them see what's happening there, that's exciting to me. So that's more of the same, I suppose. But I guess the other piece, this writing photography piece link, if I could feel that I've made improvement in that in the next 5 years, I'd be really happy.
So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your readers, your colleagues, but you ultimately live your life. Who do you think you are?
You are asking great questions.
Thank you.
I think and I say that truly, I do a lot of interviewing of people for research and other projects. So these are good questions. I congratulate you.
Thank you.
I think that my external image is one of a lot more, maybe I come across as intimidating. At least my sons tell me that sometimes, and some students. But on the inside, I don't feel that way. And that's why this being willing to be a little more open in the news columns and in this Vietnam book, that has been a revelation to me, that it's okay to show a little bit more of the I don't know what I'd call it exactly, the softer side, the emotional side, whatever it might be. I think also COVID really has forced me to be good at saying no, and to be very clear as I go forward on who I want to spend time with, because we couldn't spend time with so many people and we couldn't do most of the obligations that we all allow ourselves to get into. I'm really trying to be very careful, as a lot of people are, about how to spend my time, my thinking hours, my reading hours, and my socializing hours. And so I've talked about it to people. And in the past, I would just sort of be blank and not tell them much. So that more openness, more vulnerability, I think, has been, for me, a big step. A lot of people are much better at it than I am, but it's a big step. I'm working on a piece of writing right now and have a writing partner who said, you're not showing this person's emotions, this character's emotions. And I thought, well, that's because I don't tend to show mine. So I'm hoping that through the writing, maybe I'll also be more willing to do that and come across as less intimidating. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah. So if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger version, say in your 20s, and you can give your younger version a piece of advice based on the wisdom that you've accumulated over your life, what would be the one piece of advice you would give your younger version?
It's trite, I suppose, but go ahead and risk it. What do you have to lose? Anything I've done in my life, I don't have a super serious life or profession. Nobody's going to die based on anything I do. And so I can take the risks of being bold in what I want to do, in challenging others in a positive way, never a cruel way, but just to be bolder, I think. I'm lucky enough to get together with a bunch of women. We haven't as much during COVID, but these are all real pay-it-forward types of people. And I asked that question of them one night and wrote about it. And the kinds of things they said were: be more risky, be clearer on your own boundaries, where you're going to say no, be bold, be kinder in a more open way. And so those sorts of things came out. But I think I would just say, just do it. Don't worry so much about whether it'll fail. If it fails, that's okay. You can always pick up and do something different. And I've done that. I mean, I think we all have to. So that I would just say, try it.
So Nancy, if anybody wants to know more about you, your books, photography, what you do, where can they go on the web?
I think the easiest place would be my website, which is nancyknapier.com. So Nancy, initial K, Napier.com. That's got more about what I've done, the Vietnam piece, the books, the writing, how to get in touch with me, all those sorts of things. So I'd love it if people were willing to look it up. And I really appreciate your questions, and that as I told you, I was a little nervous because I'm not a musician, especially not a jazz musician. Love it, but not a musician. So these have been great questions in the creative realm. That's fantastic.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, music, and photography from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.